Hey, this is Joe Gilder from Personas. With Studio One version 5.5, we added a new feature called Target Loudness to the project page. This allows you to have some control over the final loudness measurement of your finished master as you're exporting it. However, there's a few things I want to cover a little more in depth just to make sure that we're on the same page as to what it is and what it does. First thing we need to do is define this term, LUFS. Yes, I luff Gregor, but that's not what that means. LUFS stands for Loudness Unit Full Scale. It's a measure of the perceived loudness of a track. So if I listen to this song here, we can see we have a lot of cool metering inside of Studio One, but over here on the right-hand side, you may not have noticed, we have a kind of a real-time LUFS measurement of what's happening right now. The overall measurement that you get over here gives you kind of the average level for this track. So in addition to seeing a real-time LUFS measurement of how loud it is right now, you can also come up here to this section and select the loudness information. As we click on this, it'll pull down a measurement here, and if it hasn't measured it yet, it'll stop for a second and do the measurement. And it gives us these pre and post effects measurements of loudness. And the one we're focused on here is this LUFS measurement here. So this is the volume, the loudness of my track before I do any mastering to it. And this is the volume after all of my plugins. So EQ on the track itself, and then the limiter on the master fader. It takes all those into account and measures that final volume level. Now, why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Because you may have heard of something called the Loudness Wars. When we moved from analog to digital in terms of consumer music, we found that we were able to make things a lot louder. So on a record player, you couldn't make things too loud or the needle would literally skip and wouldn't work. With digital, you can make things almost as loud as you want and it'll play back. And we discovered we have things like brick wall limiters, and now you can kind of track the history of the loudness of music, and as digital became more and more commonplace, the loudness got louder as well. But we started to realize that louder, even though it feels better, and like we're programmed as humans to think louder is better, it doesn't sound as good. If you were to compare two masters of a song, one that's super loud with another that's not as loud, if you were to compensate for the difference in volume and set them to the same average volume, you would hear that the one with more dynamic range, the one that's not as loud, sounds better. It's punchier, the low end is fuller and thicker, it has more dynamic range, and therefore it sounds better. Dynamic range is just the difference between the quietest part of the master and the loudest part. Now, the final mix of a song, let's say, is like this. So there's a big gap between the quietest part and the loudest part. One of the reasons we do mastering is to take that difference and make it less. So the way we achieve that is usually through something called limiting, where we turn down the loudest peaks, and this gives us some headroom up here that we can now use to turn up the overall volume. So those peaks end up still being loud, but now this quieter part got turned up, and I can hear that a little bit better. Example, my first album I ever made, I didn't know anything about mastering, so I just had final mixes. Honestly, hardly any mixing either happened. I think I threw echo on the vocal. But when I listened in my car, I had to crank the volume all the way up, and I could hear the louder parts, but on the highway, with a lot of just the noise in that environment, I couldn't hear the quieter parts of the songs. There was no more volume to give. I had these mixes with large dynamic range, and with my volume cranked all the way, I could hear this part, but the quiet parts were so far down here I couldn't hear them. I need a way to turn those up. That's one of the things mastering does for us. It allows us to push this up into a limiter so it looks like this. We push up, push up, push up. The loud part stays the same, but the quieter parts get louder. Now, there are artifacts to this, of course, and as with all things, if we give in to our human nature, we're going to push it up too far and ruin it and then learn to back off. You probably are going to have to do that for yourself to see what's happening. But as we get louder, usually there's a sweet spot. A spot where we achieve the loudness we want and some cool artifacts happen to the sound of the music, but it doesn't ruin the overall punch of the mix. It doesn't ruin the producer's intention. It just makes it louder and still sounds great. Fast forward to today. So the Loudness Wars happened. People just kept mastering louder and louder. Well, my record's louder than your record. The streaming services have finally caught on, and they said, nah, You're not going to make yours twice as loud as everyone else's. So if you're, shuffling on Spotify and I go from one song to the next one isn't insanely louder and blows my ears off. They're going to be at the same volume. How does it do that? They have a standard LUFS measurement that they force you to be at. So if I submit a song that is much louder than the standard requirement for, let's say, Spotify is going to measure it and say, turn you down. So all that work I did to make it as loud as possible actually gets turned down. So now I'm the same level as everybody else, and I sound worse because I overmastered it. So in an attempt to pump the brakes on this whole loudness war thing, these streaming services now have these standards for loudness that you have to meet. And if you don't, they will turn you down as a penalty for that. So what are these loudness standards? Well, if you open up Studio One, if you're a Studio One professional user and you have version 5.5 installed, you come to the digital release section and you'll see there's this loudness section now on the bottom right-hand side. If we turn this on, we can then choose from a bunch of different streaming services or set our own custom level. So I can see that Spotify is looking for a -14 LUFS measurement, whereas Apple Music is looking for -16. And what else? Let's check. SoundCloud is looking for -14, and there was one more I wanted to look at. Oh, Tidal. Tidal is -14 as well. So let's say we're aiming for Spotify. Let's do that. Now, this is the target loudness that we are aiming for. If we submit something to Spotify with a larger number than -14, say -11, Spotify is just going to turn it down to -14. So we might as well hit that -14 and save on some of the dynamic range that we can gain by not overmastering. This leads us to the question of what does target loudness do, and conversely, what doesn't it do? Target loudness takes your master that, let's say, is a little too loud. And if I check this box and say, export this for Spotify, it's going to measure that loudness when it's exporting, and it's going to turn the overall thing down until it has the exact loudness measurement that Spotify is looking for, in this case, -14 LUFS. Let's test it out. So I've got a song here. We can see that the post volume here, the post effects level is -11.4. If you remember from your math days, -11 is higher than -14, right? By almost 3 decibels. So if I were to export this using this setting, we can import it back in and measure the loudness and see what happened. Okay, let's do that. Okay, the folder popped up. Here is the song we just exported. Let's drag it here to the 6th place here. And let's click on loudness information, and it's going to measure that for me. All right, a few seconds later, and we can see if we look at the pre-effect level, meaning the level of just this raw audio file without the limiter in place, is exactly -14 LUFS. We've hit the exact standard that Spotify is looking for. Now, flip that around. Let's do this. Let's take this song, and we can see the pre-volume level is -16.8. And let's turn off the limiter, so let's just leave it like that. Let's say that was the final level of our master. Let's export that one and see what happens. It's -16.8, which is almost 3 dB quieter than the -14 target that we're looking for. What happens? Okay, here it is. Drag it in, measure the loudness. All right, check it out. Our loudness is still exactly -16.8. The target loudness setting did absolutely 0 to this track. Why is that? I'm going to explain. It actually makes a lot of sense once you think about it. So when we look at these measurements, we have the target loudness here, or the actual loudness of the track. We also see these levels here. TP stands for true peak. This is the loudest peak in this particular song. RMS is the average volume level, -17.2. RMS and LUFS are generally in the same ballpark number. Okay, so if I want to, this is my dynamic range. It has a dynamic range of about 16 decibels because the loudest part is -1, so much math involved, and the quietest part is -17. To have a LUFS value of -14, that means there needs to be at least like a 14 dB difference between the loudest and quietest part. Because if I were to take this and say, oh, it's only average -16.8, I need to turn this up 2.8 decibels. Well, what happens to this peak number when I turn it up? Because remember, if I'm just turning both of these up, these numbers go up. Well, If I go up just 1.1 decibels, I'm into clipping. Clipping is bad. We don't want clipping. So the only way to take this track and make it louder, to get it to negative 14 LUFS, is to apply a limiter up here and then push the volume up into it, right? So that we are clipping off a couple of dB of those loudest peaks so we can take the bottom level and turn it up. That is something that we decided we don't want to do because that's squarely in the mastering camp, right? That's your job as the mastering engineer. It's not our job as the software company. And there are so many decisions that you would make in this process. We want you to make those decisions. So it's just like we don't mix your song for you, but we give you tools to mix your songs. We don't master your songs for you. We give you the tools to do that. So the target loudness, in my mind, is just a way that allows me to master my song, get it sounding amazing. And if I went a little too loud, it's going to turn it down to the exact average volume that I want. If I go too quiet, it's going to leave it alone. So you still need to know your mastering levels. You still need to pay attention to the LUFS value and maybe use the K14 meter, which I like to use to get my overall loudness in the ballpark of what I want. But just knowing that if I go super, super loud, target loudness will turn it down for me. Spotify will turn it down for me, or I can master a little less aggressively, and then I don't have all those penalties happening. I can be over by just a decibel or so. Target loudness will turn it down and get it in the perfect zone, and then I can just export and be on my way. Okay, I know that was a lot of math, but hopefully you can see how target loudness is a great new tool to add to your mastering tool belt. We've added a bunch of great new features to Project Page as of version 5.5. And if you want to learn more the art and craft of mastering, I've created a few videos inside of Persona's Sphere that you can check out, and I've got a new one coming out very soon using all the new features in the project page. If you're not a Sphere member, you can join today. There's an annual and monthly option. It gives you access to Studio One Professional, Notion, all the Studio One add-ons inside the Persona shop, the ones that we make, and you get access to all of these exclusive videos and live streams as well. It's really fun. Give it a shot. See if it's right for you. You can check that out at personas.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.